Okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Word Up. To begin, we acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, which include the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and the Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. We also acknowledge the Wendat Nation, Huron, who occupied these lands prior to the middle of the 17th century. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land. We are committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. So welcome everybody to November's Word Up. Tonight we're talking to graphic novelists about writing and collaborating. So if you haven't already, mute your mics. Seems like you already have. And we will begin. Just a sort of a brief introduction. As we know, today's graphic novels are grounded in realities of the real world with personal narratives. So they're not just superhero stories. Our two guests, Neil Gibson and Jeff Sturge, are here to share with us their process, inspiration, and collaborative methods with illustrators. So Neil Gibson was going to be coming to us from the UK, where he lives and breathes and works. But he, I guess we didn't understand the difference of the time frame. So it's a little after midnight there right now. And he's got Comic-Con in the morning. So he's got to, get up at 5 in the morning and take off. But he has provided some video answers. So we're going to have some fun with the share screen tonight. I'm going to start with Neil, and each of them are going to have 5 minutes to do their introduction. This is a little short, so I'm going to go find my share screen.
Hi there, my name is Neil Gibson, and I'm so sorry I couldn't be there for the live Zoom call. I messed up with the timings, and I have to get up really early to go to Comic-Con in Birmingham in the UK here. So sorry I can't be there, but I have made some videos to answer some of the questions. And if you guys have any questions afterwards directly for me, if you email me at neil@tpub.co.uk, I'll happily answer any of your questions. Once again, I'm very sorry I wasn't there in person. So a little bit about me. I came from a science background, maths, physics, chemistry. I was a master's in engineering and nothing creative at all. And I thought comics were for children. Like in the UK, if you're reading comics at 14, you're old to be reading comics. Now, I did used to read a bit of Spider-Man, but I grew out of that, in my opinion. And then while I was in Canada, actually, in Vancouver, I walked past a comic shop and on a whim I went inside. And people there were so passionate about good comics. They convinced me to buy Watchmen. And it was just their sheer passion that convinced me. I remember feeling a bit silly actually as I walked out going, I spent $30 on a book I didn't really want. And I read it and it has changed my life because I realized how intelligent comics can be. And it's just a medium. It's like TV can be amazing, films, books, radio, plays. All medium has amazing content and all medium has some really terrible content as well. But I fell in love with how comics, for me, it's the efficiency they have. Because a picture says 1,000 words. And if it's done well and beautiful and told so efficiently, I think it's a fantastic thing. Anyway, I never wanted to make comics. I just like reading them. I see a big library down there of them. And then I was stuck in a project as a management consultant in Qatar, in the Middle East. And I had some free time. Normally, I used to work ridiculous hours. I was home by 7. I thought, wow, what do I do with all this time? My friends and family are back in the UK, so I tried making a comic, my first one, Twisted Dark, and it was as a hobby, and it went to #1 on the Amazon chart in the UK. And I was not expecting that. So I thought, if I get to work in comics, I get to have every day as a holiday of my life. So I gave myself 2 years to make it a shot, and I'm still doing it 10 years later. So that's my story. And now let's move on to some of the questions. Hi, so Linda told me that my intro that I recorded yesterday or the day before wasn't long enough, so she asked me to expand on more on what I do. So here's another go. I generally love comics. My book collection is downstairs because I read a lot of books as well. But these are my comics. You can see um, how many I have. But over here, those are all my comics over there, and you'll see some of the same ones reappearing because um, well, I've actually just having a look at this. This is the top three. Each reprint was different. So first of all, had no company logo. Then it had a company logo. Then we changed our logo to this one. And then later volumes, the covers change, as you notice, as things go on. We've actually even changed some of the stories in the first volume later on, because the first story we found at conventions was a bit distressing for some people because it concerned, content warning considered suicide. So we've removed that from that and added a new story into it. And so you can see the different iterations as we go through. We're always improving. It took me 2 years to get the same print quality as Marvel and DC. And you had to learn about LIFO, because you can be just a writer or you can be a publisher. I've chosen to be a publisher, which means you need to know the business side of things as well as the creative side of things. So Twisted Dark's my biggest bestseller, and it was the first thing creatively I've ever wrote in my life, and I didn't expect it to be to sell so well. People like it so much. Volume 8 is complete and will be out next year. As soon as we figure out the scheduling for it, because I actually have 6 books coming out next year, but we need to time it right so we can do Kickstarters for them so they pay for it themselves before they're even launched, as well as figuring out the right timings with to time with what the theme is. For example, if it's a Halloween, if it's a horror one, it doesn't come out at the right time, and you need to solicit in advance so shops and people are aware of it. I don't just write my own things though. I also produce comics for other people. So let's have a look here. Here are 2 examples. So this is transdimensional, and it's got this sort of logo here that I produced it because I believe I'm a good writer, but I believe I'm one of the best in the world at producing comics, and that's taking someone's good writing and making it better by editing the script, checking the colors, the lettering, and the whole process behind it. This is Transdimensional by Michael Gordon, very, very nice guy from Northern Ireland. It's a straight up horror story. And this one is Transmissions by Jed McPherson. And again, I produced it for him. And this one, actually, we're in talks with some people you would have heard of to make it into a film, but I can't really go into it. But the point is, both of these guys, they came to me and they had a great concept. And that's what I love doing most, is taking great stories and getting them made and making them better than if I hadn't been involved. And that's what, so maybe in the future I'll be doing exclusively, who knows, but maybe I'll carry on writing, I don't know. All I know is that I do love this medium, and it's my mission to get more people both reading and creating comics. So if anyone ever wants to talk about that, I won't stop yapping on about it. Linda, I hope this was long enough, and I hope your watchers are on board by me. Take care.
Yeah, my name is Jeff Sturge. Like Neil, I've come out of a science background as well. I used to be an archaeologist before I got into TV, which is what I mainly do. And that's what I really tackled graphic novels from as a TV writer point of view. I got into graphic novels because I had an idea that I wanted to make into a dramatics TV series. And I pitched it around, and I mean, if anybody's ever pitched a series before, people are kind of look at it and they're like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's great. Okay, sure, thank you. Right. Mm-hmm. And, you just eventually, it's sort of, you got to have the experience to get the experience. And my experience all came out of documentary TV. And there's a really hard line between documentary realities type series and dramatic and scripted. To a point, it's starting to fade a bit now, but there always was. Anyway, so I said, well, if I can't make it into a series, maybe I'll just make it into a graphic novel. And I contacted Nick Marinkovich, who I'd seen. I loved his work. He worked on a book called Kink. It was about this Toronto bicycle thief, and the art was really great. And so I bought some of Nick's work here. Show you in the Voyager book. Anyway, I contacted Nick, and I got Nick to draw me a couple of images for a grant for the Ontario Arts Program. And I paid him about, I think it was $2,000, and he drew about 6 or 7 pages for me, and they were great. And yeah, we got gosh, I think it was about $12,000 grant, which is really a lot to get started on. And so that's what got started. But then, you know, a good graphic artist requires a lot of a lot of time and a lot of money, and not a comic book, it's a graphic novel. So then we ran a Kickstarter program, and that's how we got our funding. Anyway, I'm kind of diverging. I think I'm starting to answer some of the questions that you can ask me later. But yeah, that's my background, coming at it from. I've written countless crime series, other docudramas, one graphic novel with another one on the way. So there you go.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Okay, so I'm going to move to our first question. There are different types of illustrated books. So what are the basic differences between graphic novels, comic books, and children's books? And what are the essential elements of a graphic novel? So I'm going to go back to share screen, and we're going to see what Neil has to say.
Okay, so the first question. There are different types of illustrated books. What's the basic differences between graphic novels, comic books, and children's books? What are the essential elements of a graphic novel? Well, children's books tend to be with prose on one side and a picture on the other, so people can. The reason is so they can learn about the world. So talking about a castle, and you see the castle, so they associate it, or like what an aeroplane looks like, for example. Whereas comic books and graphic novels both are sequential art. So as you move panel to panel, time is passing and the story is being told. And the simple difference between comic books and graphic novels is that a graphic novel is a complete story. It's a novel out of a comic book, rather than just being an issue, for example. To me, they're all comic books, really, and even like manga and manhwa. People say, "Do you read comic books?" And I go, "No, I read manga." Well, those are still types of comic books. They're just not Western ones. But really, comic books are sequential art, as defined by Scott McCloud.
Yeah, I mean, basically, coming off what Neil said, like, yeah, I mean, a comic book, it's about it's 25, 30 pages long, and it's a continuing story, and it's not really, it doesn't have to be, you know, nothing, you can have a comic book where nothing crazy has to happen in it. It can have a beginning or an end, or it can be part of another, just an ongoing series. Graphic novel it's a book, and it's written differently. Comic book, you can have like one page where there's nothing written on it. You can't do that really in a graphic novel, because it's like, the story is usually much more complex. You know, it's not, now, I mean, those lines are starting to be blurred now, a lot of comics, because comics are getting more expensive. A different audience now is grown up with comics, and they're starting to read them. You know, I bought a Fantastic Four comic book for my son, who's 9, the other day, and it was a rather explicit scene with Mr. Fantastic, the Stretch Guy, and the Invisible Woman. And I was like, okay, I'm going to close that. So comics are changing, but they're still like, yeah, a graphic novel is a book, and you can see the difference in, like, you know, the latest issue of Spider-Man, or Alan Moore's, you know, From Hell, which is like a really complex, in-depth book with characters, you know, that are being introduced, and a really complex plot being carried out.
Second question. Why should an author choose to tell a story in a graphic novel format? Well, I guess you choose the format that best suits you. I never wanted to be a writer. I don't have any ambitions currently to write a book. It depends what story you want to tell. The advantage of comics, if you imagine when Superman first arrived, that's the first time people had ever seen a man picking up a car, because it costs the same to draw anything. You can have a massive space battle, which costs you a large amount to do in TV and film, but in comics it costs the same as drawing inside of a kitchen. So if you have a story that's visually very flashy, you want to tell it and get people to see the images. Comic books probably one of the best mediums to do it in.
Yeah, I think it's just on top of that too. Like the graphic novel makes things more accessible. You know, people who wouldn't necessarily read, you know, Frankenstein, the novel, would be more prone to reading, you know, Frankenstein, the graphic novel, because it's in a comic book form. You're seeing the images, you know, and I think accessibility to me is that's why I wanted to tell my story. You know, my book was about Canadian history, which is often a very dry subject, or people think it's a dry subject. But you know, when you present it in a graphic novel form, people will be reading it and saying, "No, this is actually really interesting." So my goal with creating a graphic novel was to bring a story that someone who would not normally be into history, but into comic books, would actually would be interested in reading.
Okay, 3. What is different about plotting stories for graphic novels as opposed to writing and outlining for other fiction genres? Huh. That's an interesting one. I can't really say because I don't do the other ones. What I will say is that short stories in comics is relatively easy. You just have to trick the audience, the reader, a bit. In short stories, typically are better with twists. Whereas a graphic novel is much harder because you have to have arcs for the characters. You have to have at least 22 scenes or something. That's long. I mean, typically for a film. I base the same for a graphic novel. And it has to all make sense, and every motivation is there, as well as entertaining and surprising for the reader. So it takes me exponentially more time to write a graphic novel than it would the same number of short stories. And then when you're doing a series of graphic novels, like volumes in a series, that takes even more time to plot it all out. But I don't think there necessarily is any main difference between different genres because of mediums, because you are just essentially telling a story. But I don't know because I don't do mediums yet.
Jeff?
I don't know. I disagree with saying it's the same as a novel, writing a graphic novel. I find with a novel, it's very much you're constantly having to describe what the character's doing. You know, Joe looked up at the wall and wondered whether he could, pondered it as to whether he could get over it or not. You can't say that in a graphic novel, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to, and this was the real crux of what I found working with Nick, which was that because Nick, I'll just pass this around. You can have a look, and I'll show you guys some pictures to show you what I'm talking about. You'll draw a number of small panels. Here, I'll just give you guys. You can have a look at one. If you really like it, you can buy it now. But anyway, have a look. You can see, like some of Nick's panels are they're small, but then he'll do these big splash pages. So he'll do a big giant splash page like this, where he's there's a very poignant conversation between these two guys. And you're saying, well, how do I convey this? They're talking about a lot of things here. And so he's got to plot out, like, how can I tell everything that's going on here, this complex dialogue that these two guys are having, and they're having it he's basically got 3 images here to work with, 4 if you count this page. And so that to me is the biggest challenge. You're trying to write to what he draws, and then he's also trying to draw what the story is. And so Nick has to sit down and say, how am I gonna, Finton gets up to the wall. Because I write it as a script, and I'll say Finton gets up to the wall. He's not sure if he can climb it. Okay, Finton gets up to the wall, so what's the angle? He's staring at a wall, but he has to have a look on his face to say, can I climb this wall? So it's a much more intricate process. Whereas if I'm not saying intricate, I mean, a good novel is very intricate too, but it's just a challenge in different ways. That's
Yeah.
all. And that's the big challenge that I faced with conveying a lot of plot in two or three panels.
Yeah, and that for me seems like a really good example, because I'm a visual artist and a writer, and I've often been asked, why don't I illustrate books or my own books or my own stories? And I think I know from my own perspective how overwhelming both sides of the project would be. So your
Yeah.
example of, what angle are you going to come at when the guy's at the wall? And is he like this far from the wall? Is he falling from the wall? What's happening to his hands?
Yeah. Or is he looking at the wall saying, "Oh, this is easy"? He's not, right? He's
Yeah.
not. So that's to pose a problem. So there's anyway, sorry, go
There's
ahead.
a lot of visual angles you could come out at that project, or just that one visual. So, and then there's so many in a novel. Yeah, so I can appreciate that. So one more question and one more screen share.
Okay, can you tell us about the interplay between words and illustration? Oof, that's a big question. If you can show rather than tell, you're onto a winner. Some people say that 80% of a good film should be able to the audience should be able to tell it by not hearing anything. Now, I don't personally believe that. I've seen comics with no words, and I'm not a fan of them. I think you need dialogue or captions to help tell a story, at least in an entertaining way. But you can use, and Alan Moore, especially in Watchmen, was the master of this, these double and triple meanings with the visual interplay of words. So, for example, there's the opening scene, if I recall correctly, it's a flashback to a murder scene, and then detectives are going through the crime scene, and they finish just as the flashbacks are showing some guy being thrown out the window, and then at the same time the detectives are going to the elevator, the lift, and they're pressing a button, and they say ground floor coming up, and that then shows the guy who's falling out the window as he's about to hit the floor. So it's a double meaning there, and you can do things like, I'm not going to clean up your mess. Someone's saying that in a cafe, a hard-boiled detective series. Someone's saying that, I'm not cleaning up your mess. And in the background, someone has spilled something and the waitress is cleaning the table. Again, it's visual metaphors and double meanings, as it were, that you can use. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I kind of answered that with my last answer, didn't I?
Yeah.
It was sort of like it's the interplay between the words and the images is so crucial, because as I said, you've got to you don't have a lot of time, you don't have a lot of space to convey what's happening in a scene, and are you going to tell that story? You've got the more visually appealing way, which is these massive splash pages that come up, and they're really, as Nick draws them really beautifully, or do you have a page with like 9 panels, which is very like, as Neil was describing Alan Moore, he tells these stories very linearly in 9 panels, and, each panel has like a ton of stuff happening in it. And so it's, it's managing to, convey what, how the word, anyway, that's what I said last time. Basically, is what I was trying to say. It's how the image and the words go together to create, just so the reader will know what's happening in the given scene.
Have you had any instances in this project where you didn't agree with your artist's idea? So there was a lot of interchange and changes?
Yeah, I mean, usually, like, because, like artists are, I mean, he's not a, he doesn't like, it's not making a TV show. He's an artist.
Mhm.
And so when he spends a great deal of time drawing each page, and when he draws it, he's fully convinced this is great, like as an artist does, right? And so you got to kind of try and diplomatically say, well, I don't know, like, do you really think, just step back, and do you think people are really going to understand that, like, these two guys actually hate each other? What if we shifted it slightly to see both their faces, and then he'll go away and think about it, and then come back and you say, yeah, you're probably right, or, what if I did this? So it's always a collaboration, and you can't, just you got to realize too, just because it's your idea and you've got the characters and the story in mind, the artist is also putting in, because it's a graphic novel, the artist is putting in at least 50% or probably more of what the story is going to be, because that's why people buy these graphic novels very often, is to, they don't want to read a book, they want to read a comic and look at the images.
Mhm. Okay, so
it's giving up control, I guess, in a lot of ways that some people aren't always. That's always a tug of war, right? You have an idea and it's your baby, and it's like when you're in a collaboration like this, you've got to share, and understand that you're sharing.
and set your egos aside sometimes,
Exactly.
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense, actually.
It's a real collaborative endeavor working on comics, but in my opinion, and that does not mean I'm right, okay, it works for me, is that you need to have someone leading it. And for me, that normally is the writer or editor to push everything through, because you can't let artists draw what they want to draw, because some artists, most in my experience, don't really care about the story that much. They want to draw things that look good. I think there's great artists, and he's a good friend of mine, and there's a scene where the guy's here, the woman's there, and they're backing off away from this guy, and the next scene, she's on this side of him. And I'm like, well, no, next panel, on that side, you can't do that because it doesn't make sense. He goes, yeah, but the composition looks better on the page. But it doesn't make sense. It's not following the story. So for me, story comes first and then illustration. For me, not for everyone. Some people care most about colors, frankly. Some people care about the lettering. But the advice I have to give you, which I'm very badly saying this, is it's a collaboration, but you should be firm on what you want. And there's always a way to work together. What I really like doing, what I hate doing, is I hate an artist drawing a page with a lot of work and detail, and it's great, but it doesn't work, and I have to change it. So what I insist on is thumbnails. These are just rough sketches of this is how many panels are on the page, this is what's happening in each panel. So you can see from the body language, just the stickman, whether it will work, whether the dialogue, the balloons on the page flow, because the positioning of the lettering has to be correct, where the reader naturally goes left to right. If you ever get a reader who goes, I don't know which order to read the panels in, you have failed them. And so when you get the thumbnails, you can make sure that the lettering flows in the correct way. And then also, if there's changes they're going to ask for the artist, you do it before they've done a lot of work. Because I'm very respectful of artists' time. I can throw together some words quickly, but an artist has to spend a lot more time drawing those things. Last thing is, ideally meet in person, face to face, so that you can see if you get on with each other and you can communicate well. Because communication is really important. Okay, that's my answer on that. This would be much easier.
So we're at 7:10.
If it was live and I could answer you face to face and get some feedback. Right now I'm just staring at a little camera with a green light on my computer.
So that question was, can you tell us about the interplay between words and illustration techniques? And who decides what will work best for the story? Which you've kind of...
Once again, I'm finding my answers are bleeding into one into the other. But I mean, it's pretty much it. Like, and he's a lot of what we're saying is sort of very similar. It's like the artist has his idea in his head of what he wants to see, and it's you can't just go and after that he's spent like 2 days working on this page, that he loves so much and he's grown attached to it. Then all of a sudden you got to say, no, like there's a scene in there, actually, you can see, I can show it to you on page, let's see here. So, well, sorry for the people at home. I'll show it to you in a second. 1, 2. So page 7 here, this one right here. I had a real problem because Nick kept drawing this guy here, and who is this guy here? And I kept saying this guy here, and I kept saying, I don't think it looks like the same person. And it kind of like, it does now, more so now, but it just wasn't. And he's like, it does. And I was like, it really doesn't. And we just had to go, back and forth. I was like, can you just
So
look?
this guy here,
Yeah,
supposed to be that guy?
kind of there.
I
Yeah,
see what
it's
you're
sort of,
saying.
yeah. And he just really got into this picture. And
Well, good.
so it was a real battle between the two of us, and it was like, it looked a lot different before. It kind of got him reasonably looking, but he was just so, it was, that's one that like, I want to say it's a battle I lost, but it was just one that I had to like, I just had to give up, almost give up on it. I was like, okay, look, this is what he's drawing and you got to accept it, but I'm just going to keep hammering at him until I get at least some semblance of what I want. And so yeah, that was yeah, that's an episode there of like, who decides what's best. Yeah, you have to have someone leading, but then you also realize you can't just, unless you're paying them a salary, if you're going in on this together, you can't just bark orders, you gotta, it's all diplomacy.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I see what you're saying though. It's good. That's a really good example. So,
What's the best part of collaborating and creating a graphic novel? Seeing the art. It's seeing someone, because you have an idea for something, and sometimes the artist will make something so much better than you imagined, and it's bringing it to life. And what's great is when everyone's a little bit of creative freedom, is when they take your stuff and add their own flavor and spin on it. There was a comic we made once where it was a comedy superhero, and the guy was called I think Toxin, and he wore this mask and put poison on everything, and things go wrong, and the guy's on the phone speaking about what's going on, and we didn't write this in the script, but in the background, the artist had the Toxin character just look at a plant and touch it and kill it just for fun. That wasn't in the script, but that's collaboration, and one of the best parts is seeing what amazing talents the other people bring to the table. And that includes your colorist and your letterer, and really your editor, if you can get a good one, because they're hard. Okay, I think that's all the questions. I hope that was useful for you. And once again, I
might have skipped ahead a little.
I'm so sorry I wasn't there in person. All the best. And if you want to reach me, that's my address there.
Okay. All right. So that kind of gets us to.
Okay, well, I mean, I can writer seeking to work with illustrators. I guess.
Yeah.
I could. I don't know. My big thing is make sure if you want to hire an illustrator, just make sure you have your funding in order, and you have, that was the biggest pitfall I'm finding with my newest book, because we got to a certain point, and neither of us are businessmen. Nick's an artist, I'm a writer, and so all we've got is the light at the end of the tunnel, which is like, oh, we're going to make this book, and it was so easy to apply for grants the first time around. Like we got the Ontario Arts Council gave us like all this money. They gave us $12,000. All we had to do was raise a bit of money from Kickstarter. Perfect. This time because we were awarded that money from the OAC this time, we didn't get, they knew that they'd given it to us before, and there's tons of people out there looking for backing. So they didn't, it was really hard, much harder to get grant money. We got some. And so we got our Kickstarter together, and then there's only so much you can really, I feel comfortable asking people for in Kickstarter. I mean, maybe I could have gotten it all, but anyway, so.
How did you do?
Oh, we did fine. We got our what we asked for. We probably played it too safe though, so we're down, and then of course, and then on top of that, I just said like, okay, well, we can get this funding, I think, from, if it comes down to it, we've only got like about 10 pages left to draw. I'll help you out, man. Like, this is my baby. I wanted it put forward, and so I can help you with the final few pages. But then Nick got a job, like an actual job drawing a graphic novel series, which is a big job, and we had to. This is a passion project. Voyager is a passion project, not a You know, I mean, I work in TV all the time. That's my money job. This is his money job. So
Mhm.
we've kind of had to take a break from that. And so the final few pages are on hold. And if
Mm.
I had properly allotted my funding and gotten a business plan and all that good stuff together, which is, it's a learning process, though, right? You know, you learn from your mistakes. Then I probably would have had this book ready by now. But anyway, so I would say the very most important thing working with an illustrator is getting your funding in place, making sure, you know, find out what you know, make sure what your illustrator wants. You know, don't say, oh, well, we got grants easily last time. We'll get grants. Don't worry about it. You know, that was our philosophy, and it didn't work out that way. So you know, I'd say make sure you have funding in place, and from there, you know, once you've got that, once you've got the boring stuff out of the way, then get into your writing, then get into your how you're going to make this book together.
Yeah, that's good. So we do have one more question, but I just have a little comment as an illustrator because um, I've been asked, I can't tell you how many times, if I'd like to illustrate a book, like this kind of book or a children's book or whatever. And the usual answer is, well, we'll share profits. So my answer to them is,
Yeah, right.
okay, so what is your business plan?
Yeah.
Which you kind of
Yeah.
open the door for me there. And they say, oh, but really, I just really want to give it to, I want to writing this for my grandkids or my kids. So basically what they're telling me when they tell me that is they don't really want to pay me to do the illustration, which can take as long or longer than writing the book did. And they think what they're going to sell a couple books on Amazon. I don't know. So it's a frustrating experience 99% of the time when I'm asked if I'll do the book for people. So I like that you at least had a plan to apply for a grant. You know?
Yeah, well, I knew
Yeah.
I needed something, right? Yeah, no, sharing profits. I mean, these, you know, by and large, like we sold, I don't know, we sold probably like 500 or 600 copies of Voyager at different Comic Cons, but I mean, that's that's just it's not like that's not a share. That's not like a regular profit stream. You know what I mean? And 500 or 600 books is actually not horrible for a Canadian book to sell. Really, like
I think a
um,
couple thousand is like a bestseller in Canada,
yeah.
something like
So
that.
like
5,000? Yeah.
yeah.
So
So
600 at one event is pretty
well,
good.
no, it's 600 over the course of a year. Like we
Yeah.
went to like Toronto Comic Con, Kingston Comic Con, Toronto Fan Fest,
Okay.
all these different ones, and yeah, like there was all and they're great places to sell your books because people go there with money.
Mhm.
They're all comic. There's thousands of comic fans. They're all there, and they're all looking to buy books. So if you can get in on any of these, especially even like the ones doesn't have to be Toronto or Kingston, it can be anywhere. All these places are always packed with comic fans, and they're there to buy because they're there because they love books, and they're there to support the artists too. TCAF is another one. The Toronto, what was it called? I don't know what TCAF stands for. It's for especially for graphic novels. It's done by the owner of the Beguiling.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, there you
We
go.
should look that up and maybe we'll have something to share. So what's the best part of collaborating when creating a graphic novel?
Just the creating, like, you've got two people with an equal stake in this, they're both coming at it there. And if you get two people who are totally into it and got a good vibe about this project, as me and Nick did, we were really into this, still are. And just despite the fact that he's can't work on it right away. Um, but just collaborating and getting that creative vibe going, and I'll put an idea to him and he'll actually give me story ideas, like, oh, this guy shouldn't die in this scene, we doesn't serve a purpose. I think if you put it like later in the book or he escapes or something, it'd actually be much better. And then I go back and I go, yeah, you're right, and so I write my scripts like a movie script, which works really well for graphic novels because it's a storyboard, right? Very often TV shows get storyboarded, right? You'll have they come in and they map out the storyboards of this is what happens here, here, here. not frame by frame, but
Mhm.
scene by scene, and that's really what a graphic novel is. So it's a selection. It's a series of storyboards, or any comic book. It's a series of storyboards with the speech balloons attached, and so yeah, where are they going with that again?
Well, we were just talking about collaborating. So
Yeah,
it sounds like collaboration actually makes a better
yeah. So he's looking at the
story,
script.
period.
He's looking at the script, and he's kind of he can make notes on it it's like a movie script basically, and that's how we work.
Okay. Does anyone here have any questions?
You answered my question kind of. I was thinking about graphic novels as compared to storyboards.
Yeah.
A lot of it is very similar.
Yeah, very often like storyboards don't have words, but yeah, that's why graphic novels do so well. As far as you've seen a lot of comic books and stuff being movies now, and graphic novels like Neil Gaiman's Sandman on Netflix, because producers can look at these, thumb through it, say, oh yeah, okay, I get this, I see what's happening here, and they can, they're looking at this as they would look at a series of storyboards, which is what their mind is trained to do in a lot of ways.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're looking at it like, oh, I get it. Yeah, this would make a good series, or no, it wouldn't, or whatever. So yeah, that's so yeah, they're very similar in that regard. And they both lend themselves to having. I know a lot of writers who write graphic novels do it as a movie script. So if you can get a pair of screenwriting software, it's a good way to tackle a graphic novel, should you be interested.
And most of the time you buy the screenplay, but you make it buy also as a screenplay and the storyboard.
Oh, you can, right?
Make it as a storyboard, right? Didn't see Trinity, on the window comes to the
Yeah, and I'm sure those guys, I think the Wachowski brothers were very big comic book guys, I believe. That movie almost looked like a comic book in a lot of ways, didn't it?
That's true.
Yeah.
Neil Gaiman is a good example because he's got a lot of texture in his writing that comes through in the visual work that the artists he's worked with both on screen and off.
Mm-hmm.
So he's a really good example.
Yeah.
Does anyone else here have any questions?
Did you publish or self-publish or go through
No.
a publisher?
So we got a publisher when we were applying for the grant. One of the grants, they have these like publishers often review a panel, and the guy's like, well, I've awarded the money to someone else, but I'd really like. Good news is I'd really like to publish your book. So yeah, so Guernica, they they were actually like judges on a judging panel where they could award a very small amount of money. It wasn't even that much. So I didn't mind that, but they came in and they published they're a very small production company. They mostly publishing company, sorry, they mostly publish poetry, but they really wanted to get into graphic novels. And I think actually it was their publicist who recommended me to you, right?
Yep.
That's
Yep.
correct. Yeah.
Very good to work with.
Yeah, so then you kind of lucked out then.
I did. Yeah.
applied.
It was.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, I mean, because we were shopping around for publishers for months, and like we didn't even, we got the standard letter, thanks very much, not interested, thanks very much, not interested. And then just out of the blue, this came up, I've got good news and I got bad news sort of thing,
Yeah.
So no, it worked out. It worked out very fortuitously that we applied for that grant.
Yeah, I just applied for the OAC to do a graphic novel as well. So
Which one? Which one was it?
the Ontario Arts Grant.
Yeah. There's a couple of different ones. There's one that's awarded by publishers, which is a smaller grant, and I can't remember what that one's called. Works in Progress, it used to be called. And then the big one, I guess, is the one that you're talking about there now.
Yeah.
One that, as I said, I got it the first time we applied, but I didn't really realize that they were never going to give it to me again until about 2 years in. And I was like, yeah, they're not going to give me the same guy. Like there's too many people applying and too few funds. But I got it once, so I walked away. But yeah, no, it's really helpful. The OIC are one of the few organizations out there that really support Ontario writers, in particular graphic novels. They're great.
That's good to know. Anyone else have any questions? Oh, we have one here.
Are graphic novels always original works, or sometimes are they made of books that are already published?
Oh yeah, no, lots.
So are graphic novels always original books?
Yeah, no, there's graphic novel of Frankenstein, there's a graphic novel of Dracula, like, and tons of things, because once again, it's an accessibility thing, right? Like kids who would never, look at a 300-page novel and get intimidated by it would much more readily pick up a comic book that they're used to reading. And, so they're doing that a lot in schools, like a lot of graphic novels of classic literature is being made up. So I think specifically for school children. I'm not 100% sure if that's exactly why they're doing it, but
that's a good way to get them to read
it's
it.
a good way to get them to read it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've got a Frankenstein one. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Any more questions online? Just unmute and ask. I don't know how I got this view.
Hi, can I ask one? Hello?
Please do.
It's Greg.
Hi, Greg. Go ahead.
Yeah. Can you talk for a minute about print versus online graphic novels? Like, would you do one online versus getting one printed out?
Yeah, I've never done one online. Now, interestingly, like Nick is using an online program to edit our new book. He did all the first book totally classically, like ink and paper. But he's got a new digital online program for editing. Putting the book online, yeah, I mean it is. Would you call Kindle or Kobo or Kindle? Is that it? Would that be online? Is that
digital at the very least? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, an ebook. Like so automatically now our publisher has put. We do have a book, an ebook, like a Kindle, or not sure what the other one is, what its competition is. But yeah, our book is. But as far as like just a digital comic that would be read on the web. Yeah, I don't know. I never really thought about doing it.
I guess, can I reword it? Can I reword the question for a minute? I guess I was asking, do you find your fans prefer like a book they can hold in their hand and they buy it and they can look through it and hold it in their hand, put it on the shelf,
yes,
versus, how many people ask for it, digitally?
100%. Yeah, we get some requests for a digital book, but like I'd say 75-80% are the paperback books that people, and people, it's like buying a record, an album or something, right? People just like that. Yeah, holding it in your hand, and that's why I guess, just like graphic novels are more popular today than they probably were in recent years. So are records, like CDs aren't, tapes aren't, but like record, that album that you can hold in your hands, people desire that much more, I find, than a digital copy.
The CDs is practically
Yeah.
over. The records aren't tons of records, all the time records, endlessly buying records.
Yeah.
Yeah, vinyl is pretty loved. Yeah.
Yeah, who knows what my kid will probably really, when he's 20, he'll probably be really into CDs. Yeah, probably not. I don't think it's the same.
CD is a digital format. It's the same as having it on your computer.
For sure.
Format. There's no difference between digital. I think maybe when CDs came out,
You couldn't.
Machine that you bought, but
You needed the machine then.
Weren't,
Mm.
ubiquitous.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you used to need the machine to play your digital music, and now you don't. You don't need a CD player. Any more questions? Doesn't look like it. I'm not seeing a chat here today, so. Okay.
Just trying to think of a question. One of my questions was, the format that the artist was working in. You already answered that one as well. He did pen and paper and at the beginning, and now it's possibly looking at working digital, right?
Yeah, like well, drawing the images, but then I don't know how he does it.
Scanning and
I guess so. Yeah, I don't know the program he's using, but I do know that he's drawing them by hand and then editing them digitally, which is
Interesting. Yeah, I am learning a program called Procreate, which has been fun. And I can see doing an entire digital, or not digital necessarily, but entire illustrated book of any kind using Procreate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think probably the next step is live animation, right? Really.
Yeah, and this doesn't animate so much, but I mean, I can create something that looks like a full-on painting, or I can create something that looks like a drawing with pencil or pastels. Like you can really mimic the feel of something done by hand, which is kind of nice. You can be really creative.
Well, there are VR comics now too, where you put on the we're locked in. Oh, there you go. VR comics where you put on the VR headset and you can kind of almost go through the comic book like that, which is I find
It almost seems like it would be a natural sort of progression, right?
Yeah.
Taking a graphic novel and moving it into maybe not animation, but a somewhat moving form, or like you say, looking around to see it, right?
yeah.
I believe there are some apps out there where you can kind of input your work and start creating more of a digital, either add your comic or your story to games, and then digitally create something that's more animated.
Certainly,
They're coming.
Immersive experiences, every money that goes out of the city, right? It's all this. It's an interesting sort of concept to not be quite animation, but still keep three-dimensional in a digital way, right?
Yeah.
Still be a graphic sort of novel sort of idea.
Okay, do you have any other questions or thoughts?
I got one more. So
Ask away.
So as an illustrator and a writer, what do you think about upcoming AI art, like Midjourney, where you type in words and it just creates all these like really cool things that would take hours to produce?
I don't know. I mean, it's essentially it's a machine just doing its best to interpret what you're writing. I mean, it goes back to what you were asking earlier about digital versus something you can hold in your hand. Do you want something that's written by a robot, drawn by a robot, or do you want something that's actually come out of someone's mind or what someone's actually watching when they're drawing, and there's no good or bad about either or, I don't know that the software is advanced enough to do anything super complex, but I mean, it's getting there pretty quickly.
So I was just involved in a very cool theater project, and they used some AI art, part of this to kind of fit with the story and the theme, and they wanted a lot of art that looked old or looked like it was from generations ago. So they used AR and they presented it all on these big screens, kind of like what we've got to my left here. And it was really interesting. Like it had texture. You basically could input the kind of artist or the kind of era. And then if they wanted a portrait, throw in a picture of the person and see what came back at you. So there was some weird things I think that happened. So you want to be able to Photoshop it to fix it. So, they had one guy whose ear shows up down here and got a couple extra ears, and I saw something online actually where they were I think they asked the AI to do some art on shaking hands, and there's all these extra hands that show up in the, it was so inaccurate, but as an artist, you're like, well, I wouldn't have even thought of that myself. It's a mistake. But what is that guy, the Bob artist guy? He loves, his thing was happy mistakes, right?
Bob Foss?
Yeah, yeah.
Bob Ross.
Ross.
Oh, who?
Bob Ross with the hair. Happy mistakes or happy accidents. That was sort of his favorite thing. So you get a lot of that with AI, I think, a lot of happy accidents. And I think artists are using them. So they have an idea and they're sketching it and they're not quite forming, they're not there, they're not getting to it yet. So they throw in a couple things in this AI. I think there's 2 or 3 online that are pretty popular. And then they get some ideas that they can marry together and then put together on their canvas on their own, you know? So I think it's, right now it's a tool for artists that they can use, like if we're open to it. I don't think that you would want to do a graphic novel with it.
Is there also a word in that as well?
There are some word AIs and some storytelling ones.
How do they work?
It's probably similar.
Yeah, I think you could say like write a story about, you can do, I don't know how complex they are, but it's like, you know, write a story about a man going to going to work or something, and he'll, you know, John drove so and so, you know, it'll come up with this paragraph of the guy, but like it just needs to be fed the ideas, right? And it will take this, you know, what you want it to describe, and it'll put it into a couple of paragraphs.
I think we could do just a panel just on AI writing and art. It'd be very interesting. Find someone who's been using it enough, but really good question.
So one more question Linda had was how I have evolved as a writer through the process, and I think it's something that advice I always give to other people, and that's that you should learn to walk before you run, because the number of new writers who've never written anything and they say they have this idea for this 7-part series, I'm like, so try doing a short story first, try doing a 1-page story, then do a 4-page story, then do a 10-page, then do a whole issue, 22 pages, and then you can do a graphic novel. So I might sound hypocritical about this, because the first thing I ever made, which is Twisted Dark, is my bestseller, and I have 8 volumes so far. I'm going to do 18, I think. But I kind of cheated on that one, because what that is a series of short stories that are all interconnected and they all tie together as the series goes through, but they are standalone stories if you want. So I can write a story, and then afterwards I think, how do I fit it in? And it is all planned ahead, but it's a cheating way of doing it, because they're standalone stories. When I made my first graphic novel, which was a much longer story, I had to develop a new technique for it. And people have their own techniques for writing stories. There's many different ways of doing it. And you should find whatever works for you and ignore everyone else's techniques, frankly. But I had to develop my own one, and I list it by scenes, and I have what's the theme of the story, and sometimes even use the hero's journey, because it's a proper long story, and it has to all tie together and make sense and not have any plot holes, because I hate plot holes. I was surprised how much time it took me, because short stories are very easy for me. Writing a graphic novel when I first started was considerably harder. And also, when I first started, I'd write them by issue. Now I don't. I write the whole thing in one go so that it's complete. It's easier for me that way. Then I've moved on to my latest one, which is an actual ongoing series that should run properly for like 7 or more volumes, and that required again me learning new techniques to do it, because for it to all to make sense and to not have thousands of characters, to make it all flow properly, it was a learning experience, and I couldn't have done this 3-4 years ago. And I remember Ken Follett, who wrote Pillars of the Earth. That was one of his bestsellers. He was a writer for many years, and he said that when he had the first idea for it, he knew he wasn't ready as a writer for it. It took him 10 years to write this massive book, because of how it was across 2 generations for it to happen. He had to learn what he's doing. So, in short, what I'm saying is, learn to, if you're new to writing, start off short and small, do small stories, and then build up, because that's what I did. And if I tried to go into a big thing right from the start, I think I would have certainly failed. Well, that's my advice to you, but then take every advice with a pinch of salt, because you're your own person. Maybe you can do it. So just go for it. Make your stories.
Do we have any more? It does not seem like it. So the next really big question is, do we have anyone for open mic? Crickets. So open mic means if you have written something and you want to share it, you can you can read your work.
Right. I'm Bruce Hansen. I write under the name Bruce A. Hansen. And for children's picture books, which my first one will be out hopefully before Christmas, but we're getting a little tight. It's under Robert Rhyme. It's a poem, and I've got a book of poems which are unpublished. And so the name Rhyme is spelled R-I-M-E. And if you think about it, there's a reason for that. But anyway, what I'm going to read from is my novella. It's a young adult novella, although most of the readers right now are adults. And the reviews have been pretty good, coming in on, particularly on Goodreads. It's called Double Cross. It's about 3 17-year-old students, Matt, his twin sister Ashley, and their best friend Sadia, and they're going to Sadia's aunt's for a weekend. It's a mystery adventure. And I'm going to read just a short section out of chapter 2, which is My Buddy the Biker. The kids are taking the bus from Winnipeg up to Riding Mountain National Park, or the edge of it, where Sadia's aunt has bought a cabin, as we call it out west. They've been sitting in the bus depot waiting for the bus, and they've been watching and joking about some of the other travelers. And then they get outside and wait so they can get the best seats on the bus. And this section is introduced another character into the book. His name is Chuck, and he's a biker who they had observed inside the waiting room. So the kids are out, they've got on the seats, and they grab the best seats, the front seats, with the deal, Matt sitting behind the 2 girls, that they would change seats every hour so they could rotate for the best seats to look out the front. So they're sitting in their spots now when this section opens. The rest of the passengers streamed on. Oh, and Matt is the protagonist, 17 years old. The rest of the passengers streamed on. The last to climb up the steps and poke his bushy head into the warm air was the biker. He stood there for a moment, scanning the full bus, then clomped down the aisle. I relaxed until a giant hand landed on the top of my seat. I looked up. Another paw clamped onto the back of Sadia's seat, blocking any chance of escape I might have had. The biker glared at me. "The bus is full," he sniffed. "So, bro, if that seat beside you isn't taken, it looks like you and me are going to be traveling buddies." I got up to let him squeeze in. Leaning forward in the aisle, I whispered to the girls, "So which of you want to enjoy his company when we switch seats?" They pointed at each other and said, "She will." The bus started out of the station. The biker cleared his throat, swallowed, and grunted. "So, you a student?" "Yeah." "High school?" "Yeah." "How old?" I paused. This was beginning to feel like an interrogation, but I answered, 17. "Ever been in trouble?" "A little." "Do yourself a favor. Finish school, stay in your lane. Trouble ain't worth it. I got mixed up with some bad dudes and ended up in prison." "Ever been in prison?" I looked at him like he was on drugs, and maybe he was. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "As a visitor, I mean." "No, neither way." I wanted my lack of prison experience to be perfectly clear. He got all glassy-eyed, like he was recalling a vacation in Hawaii. "I was in Stony Mountain Pen." "What did you do?" I immediately wished I hadn't asked. The conversation was getting way too friendly. "Nothing much. Me and my buddies robbed some gas stations." He looked out the window. "I'm not into that stuff now. Took courses in the slammer, got my high school diploma, and found my calling." I felt my eyes widen. "You got religion?" "Nah, nothing like that. Since I had this natural knack of palming things, I decided to put the skill to good use. I learned magic." "You're a magician." Even I heard the doubt in my voice. He became surly. It was as if his dark eyes were growling. "That's what I said. You got problems with your ears?" He thrust a large hand at my head. I froze. He tugged my earlobe, pulled out a loonie, and then barked. There's more where that came from. Another half a dozen coins followed the first. I stiffened with realization that this dude might be a few badly cracked eggs short of a dozen. If I upset him, he could break my neck in a second. Why was I still sitting there? Why? Because jumping up and screaming didn't seem like an option either. His thick fingers came from my face. Every muscle in my body spasmed. My hands clamped onto the armrests. He yanked a $5 bill from my mouth, wedged it under my right palm, and said, "Here, I think this is yours. You must have misplaced it." His eyes narrowed, his head tilted, his expression now one of concern. "Are you always this uptight? You should think about taking up meditation." He slammed back into his seat, laughing. I released my breath. "You really are a magician." "You didn't believe me? See, that's the problem in the world. Too many stereotypes. You should see the look on the faces of suburban housewives when I knock on their door. And they open the door to see me standing there for little Bobby's or Rebecca's birthday. One of my best tricks is turning new mothers into stone."
All right. Do we have anyone online who wants to do a reading? Crickets again. Okay. Well, I'm going to close her off with a short poem, and then I'll tell you what's happening next month. All right. So I wrote a poem called Taking Space when I was kind of sitting at the 5 Points Theater looking out on the people walking by and the cars going by and stuff. So let's see what I'm reading. I paced in a glass house watching people pass on the outside of the window. Ladies in excited conversation, cars impatient at red, an ambulance flashing its party over lights, ignored by the hunched homeless lady in blue plaid and the businessmen tapping their phones. Need to arrive, rush. An erect woman awaits at the red, holding a luminous presence. Confident in her even steps, she crosses before the signal sets, wearing nothing of prominence except her bold stance and even swagger, and her hold on my space in my memory. My back rounded forward like the others, we make ourselves small. 2 rotator cuff injuries and a pain in my neck, the consequences of working hard and fitting into a world that values me little, because I have valued me not. I push my chin to correct my error and straighten my stance. I think of the bright lady, glowing in confidence and ripped jeans. I am bigger on the inside. It's time to show it. It's time to live it. I am here to take up space. Thank you. So next word up is Thursday, December 8th at 7 p.m. And we're talking about spoken word. So spoken word poetry is a performance art that transcends the written form. I want you to come, or I hope that you guys come and enjoy the slam dramatic monologues with the intense emotional delivery of our featured poets. We have Ty the poetess, who is local, Leanna Cosmano and Dane Swan. The dyslexic in me always wants to call him Dan Swain, but it's Dane Swan. So the power of spoken word poetry is meant to be memorable. So this is a do not miss event. Please sign up for our newsletter at wordupberry.com. We thank Rhubarb Media for hosting our website, checkenergy.ca for hosting our Zoom, and the City of Barrie for their support. So thanks everybody. Thanks everybody at home.